Lupita Mañana, Chapter 12. Monday came, and once more, Lupita, Salvador, and Aunt Consuelo went out in Fidencio's truck. This time, he took them in a different direction, and they harvested zucchini squash. They didn't snap them off by hand, but used metal cutters. By quitting time, Lupita's hands ached as much as before, and her fingers were blistered in new places, a cruel gift of the cutters. She felt better, however, when she got home and caught sight of the little white paper on the table that proved Emilio had sent the letter as he had promised. He had also kept the change from Lupita's $4, but she had expected he might. The next day, Tuesday, was extremely hot, one of those freakish humid days that sometimes strike Indio late in October. No morning breezes cooled Lupita as she labored in the same field as the day before. Perspiration poured off her body, streaming into her eyes, making her long for the water she carried with her in a plastic bottle. Now and then, she straightened up to ease her back, wipe the sweat from her eyes and with her shirt sleeve, and take a long drink from the bottle. To refocus her eyes, she looked out over the field before she bent once more to cut the deep green vegetables from their vines. Near noon, the sun blazing directly overhead, Lupita rose for yet another drink. This time, the warm water made her feel sick to her stomach. She gazed out over the field, which shimmered in a haze of smog and heat. Fighting nausea, she looked ahead for Salvador, Aunt Consuelo, and Señor Fidencio. They were stooped over harvesting. Between her and them were the other pickers from Señor Fidencio's truck. Suddenly, Lupita's eyes riveted on the woman nearest her, some 3 rows ahead. The middle-aged Pocha was also standing up, her body swaying. As Lupita watched, she put her hand to her chest and sank to her knees, crying out softly. What should she do? Lupita asked herself in panic. Aunt Consuelo would know. Lupita put down her water bottle and began to run, leaping over the rows. As she passed the sick woman's row, Lupita glanced over and saw that she was bending forward and vomiting. Tia Consuelo, Lupita cried, running. Consuelo heard and stood up, turning around to look about. Lupita ran up, panting, and pointed to where the other woman knelt in her row. Elena! It is Elena! Consuelo cried, as she recognized who it was. Lupita said swiftly, I saw her go down. Shall I get the boss? No! Her aunt's voice was firm. Stay away from him and his shed. Get Fidencio instead. See! While her aunt started toward Elena, Lupita hurried through the rows to Señor Fidencio. He had just filled a box with zucchini and was carrying it to the edge of the field. When he saw Lupita coming, he stopped. Her heart racing, Lupita gasped out, Señor, it is the woman they call Elena. I saw her fall down. I went to Aunt Consuelo and she said to come to you. Elena, take my box to the end of this row, little one. Lupita did as he ordered, then ran along the side of the field to Elena's row. Her aunt was sitting on the ground and Elena was leaning against her shoulder. The front of Elena's cotton dress was dark with perspiration as she gasped to fill her lungs with air. Señor Fidencio, kneeling beside the 2 women, touched Elena's forehead with his hand, then her heavy bare arms. Elena, your skin is very wet, but you have no fever. Are you dizzy? He asked gently. Si, very dizzy, and sick to my stomach. I feel so weak I fell down. Then I threw up. He nodded. The sickness that comes with the heat. I have had it myself. It can be very dangerous. The boss will call for an ambulance to take you to the hospital. No, Fidencio! Elena struggled away from Consuelo Ruiz's shoulder, stretching out her hand. She caught his wrist and pleaded, Fidencio, por favor, help me to your truck. I can lie down in the back. I need to sleep for a time. I'll be all right. I've had this before, too. Do not ask the boss for an ambulance. Tell him I have the flu. Give me some of my water and the salt shaker in my pocket. I think I didn't put in enough salt this morning. Ay de mi, do not let the boss call for the ambulance. La migra will find me, and I have been here so long now. Exhausted, Elena fell back onto Consuelo's shoulder. La migra, thought Lupita. This woman was a Mexican like herself, and as afraid of La migra as she was. Lupita, go back to your row, Fidencio ordered. After we take Señora Elena to the truck, I'll finish her row. Obediently, Lupita went back over the rows and picked up her clippers. Before she began to snip off squash again, She watched Senor Ferencio and Aunt Consuelo help the staggering Elena to the old truck parked a distance away, under the lacy pepper trees. Looking away, Lupita sought out her brother. There he was ahead of her, sitting down and harvesting. As she started to work, Lupita wondered how many other harvesters in this field were also wetbacks. How many others were as constantly afraid as she was? Now, she had a new fear for Salvador and herself. She was afraid of an illness or an accident that could force them into a hospital. Elena was not in the back of the truck the next morning when Lupita and Salvador climbed in. One of the other women told them in the darkness, "Senora Elena is resting today. She will not go to the fields with us this week, but she is feeling much better." Before Lupita could say she was pleased, the woman went on. "Salvador, do you see the big box here beside me?" "See, I see it." "Ferencio says that it contains clothing for you. It is from his grandson, Lucio." Lupita tensed as she heard Salvador's excited intake of breath. So, Lucky Ruiz had not forgotten his promise. She felt strangely disturbed. Friday of that week fell on All Souls' Day, November 2nd, an important holiday in Mexico. It was the day when the family dead returned to their homes. Aunt Consuelo and her family did not observe the day at all. Lupita had no photograph of Papa, so she could not even light a candle decorated with a black ribbon to honor him either. The night before the Day of the Dead, Mama would set her candle alight in front of his picture and put out a glass of water for his thirst, some food to nourish him, and incense to guide him home. She and Uncle Antonio would go to Mass the next morning with their neighbors, who would honor their own dead. But not Lupita and Salvador. No, they must go to work, not to church. That Saturday dawn found them riding to yet another field of crookneck squash. Neither Salvador nor Lupita had anything to say to the others in the back of the truck, but Elvio laughed and joked as usual. As they arrived at the field, Lupita whispered to Salvador, "Mama should have gotten my latest letter by now." "See, Lupita, she must have the money." Salvador got out of the truck and stalked off to get in line for the food boxes. His tone was angry. He had been angry since Wednesday, speaking sharply to Lupita when she tried to talk to him. Even the Ruiz children kept out of his way. Getting that cardboard box of brightly colored shirts, jackets, and trousers from Lucky had not helped his temper. The clothing fit and was of better quality than anything he had ever owned, but it was not what one wore to harvest crops. Salvador still dressed in Papa's clothing when he went to the fields, but Lupita could tell by the way he put on the black and white check coat, the felt hat, that he disliked them for their shabbiness. Ay de mi. Salvador despised Papa's clothes. How could he? When Lupita returned from the fields, she found Irela waiting on the front steps, her chin resting on her fists, her elbows on her knees. When the others had gone inside, Irela said, "Lupita, the stores are open. If you'll buy me an ice cream sundae, I'll help you get a dress to wear to church." "Ice cream sundae? What is that?" asked Lupita, who had never heard the words before. "Something made out of ice cream, a sweet." "What does it cost?" 75 cents for the kind I want." "So much!" Lupita shook her head in dismay. That was almost a half hour's pay. But she must have a dress. If she got one today, she could go to Mass tomorrow. "Sí, Irela," she agreed, despite her misgivings. Who else would go with her to the store? Elvio? No. Catarina? No. Catarina would make fun of her no matter what she bought. Aunt Consuelo? No. They might not be able to find a Spanish-speaking clerk. Lupita washed her face and hands, and then she and Irela walked the 1.5 miles into Indio to the big Gringo department store. Irela confidently led Lupita to where the women's clothing was sold. Lupita, afraid not only of La Migra but of the Gringo sales clerks, hung back while Irela pulled her by her hands down the racks of dresses. With an assured air, Irela pulled out dress after dress and held it up to Lupita for size. There was no rose-pink dress of Lupita's dawn daydream, but there was a yellow one with white dots. Irela pressed it to Lupita's chest, shoulders, and waist, and then held it down to her knees for length. "See, this one fits you." She assumed a serious expression. "Lupita, you should try it on, but the Gringo clerk over there says you can't because you look too dirty." A fire of humiliation spread over Lupita's face, and she asked quickly, "What does it cost, Irela?" She gasped when she heard the price. "It costs even more than the blue dress in Colton." "It is the cheapest one here," Irela warned her. "And Elvio says this is the cheapest store in town." "See, I know. Reaching into her jacket pocket, Lupita pulled out her pay envelope and gave it to Irela. They bought a cotton petticoat, yellow knee socks, a yard of yellow ribbon, and a pair of black vinyl sandals in the same store. At each stop, Irelia pulled out more of Lupita's earnings to various clerks. When they had everything that Irelia thought Lupita needed, Irelia led the way to the store's cafe, where she ordered a chocolate ice cream sundae, and at Lupita's expense. Lupita sipped her soft drink and marveled that she had spent over 35 gringo dollars for clothing. As they walked home with her packages, Lupita's eyes filled with tears. How proud Papa and Mama would be to think that she had earned so much money all by herself. Aunt Consuelo said the yellow dress was a little long, but that they shouldn't shorten it because Lupita might still grow. Salvador glanced at her in her new finery and said indifferently, "Bueno." Clearly his mind was somewhere on his upcoming evening with Lucky Ruiz. After supper, Salvador washed and dressed in his new clothing very early. He began to prowl the length of the living room, back and forth, and by 7 o'clock he had made them all nervous. Suddenly, Lucky Ruiz arrived in his red car with a roar and a screech. He slammed the car door shut, then bounced up to the house. "Hola, I am here," he announced loudly to everyone. "Come on, Salvador." Without a polite adios to anyone, Salvador walked out the open door with Lucky, leaving Lupita staring after him. Aunt Consuelo did not seem upset at the rudeness of the two youths. She chuckled and warned Lupita, "Do not wait up for your brother. I know that Lucio will stay out all night. His father and mother were very glad to have him move out so they could get some rest." Where would Lucky take Salvador? Madre Santísima! Would Lucky get Salvador into trouble with the police here? There was not only La Migra to worry about, there was also the gringo police. When Senor Fidencio honked his horn the next morning, 2 persons were still missing from the Ruiz house. Uncle Emilio, to no one's surprise, and Salvador. At first, Lupita hesitated to get into the truck, but Aunt Consuelo said shortly, "I told you not to wait for him. He'll be along." All through Mass, Lupita kept looking for Salvador. Even when she lit the candle at the altar for Papa, her thoughts stayed to him. Where was he? Where had he gone with Lucky? What had happened to him? To her relief, Lucky's red convertible was parked beside the house when Fidencio brought them home. Lupita sped inside ahead of her cousins and aunt. Her brother and Lucky sat at the table drinking coffee. Lupita sniffed the air. Something about it was different. There was a queer smell, but what was it? She had smelled it before. Suddenly, Lupita knew. There had been an old tramp who smoked marijuana all the time in Ensenada, and he had smelled like this. The scent, even stronger than the smell of the leaking gas stove, was coming from Lucky or Salvador. Trouble was here in this room. "Hola, hola," Lucky greeted the rest of the family as they came in the door. Then he pointed to Salvador. "I stayed to tell you that Sal is going to move in with me and my other friends today. I quit my job as a dishwasher to work in a garage, and last night I arranged for Sal to take over my old job in the cafe." Salvador leaving? Lupita stared in horror at her brother. He was looking at the floor. Mama had said they were to be together, and now he was leaving her. "No, no," she cried, and burst into tears. Salvador got up, took Lupita by the elbow, steered her into the bedroom on the right, and closed the door. Leaning against it, he said in a low, hard voice, "Lupita, listen to me. This is work I like. Work that pays me better money than harvesting squash, even more money than I got in Colton. It is a good job in the cafe that serves Mexican food." Lupita wailed, "But Mama said we were always to stay together." "Don't make so much noise. I don't want everyone to hear us. We will be in the same town, Lupita. You will be living with a Ruiz, and I will be living with a Ruiz. Think, Lupita. I'll have more money to send to Mama. We can go back to Mexico earlier this way." "But La Migra, Salvador, La Migra came to the cafe in Colton." "La Migra has not come to this cafe in a long time. Mostly pochos work there. If it does come, every pocho who works there will warn me in plenty of time. Lucky says if I got away from La Migra one time, I'm lucky by nature and I can get away again." "Salvador, please stay here with me. Stay here. You have only seen this pocho 2 times. I do not like him. Don't leave me. I am afraid." Lupita ran to Salvador and tried to wind her arms around his waist.